Hey everybody, this is Matt with mattsmath.com. Thanks for joining us here today as we talk about how to solve equations with multiplying and dividing using variables. All right, let's do it. We're in the Common Core Math Standard of Expressions and Equations, and we're going to use our math properties and our math genius to create expressions that are equal to each other and solve real-world problems having to do with expressions and equations. All right? Our guiding question, and we're going to be able to answer this today, is how can we write and solve equations with multiplication and division? We've done it with addition and subtraction now. Now we're going to do multiplication and division. Not much different. So this won't be too hard. All right, so let's talk about it. You know, when we gather everybody together for the holidays, we gather all our presents together, and since we have 4 kids, we separate and we divide and we put all our presents in specific groups, and we try and figure out who's got the most, and you know, we really just try and become jealous of each other, and then we just steal everybody's presents, and then it just is a fun time. No, not really. We really just take turns opening each other's presents and enjoy watching and see what everybody else gets. And really what this relates to math is that we are dividing up the presents and we're working backwards to figure out who has what presents. We put them all in one big pile, we work backwards, divide them all up, and bam, each person gets a certain amount of presents that they will open up. All right? So that's what we're doing. It would be much easier to divide them up and open them up in one at a time or in order so that everybody can see what each other got rather than just total free-for-all. All right, so we're going to break things down into groups. All right, just like what we've seen before, if I'm adding something to a variable, I subtract it to get rid of it. Now, if I'm multiplying something by a variable, then I just divide it. Or if I'm dividing some number by the variable, or the variable by that number, then I multiply it. No big deal. Just doing the opposite operation, okay? So really what we're doing is how can we arrange these to break them down into equal separate groups. If we want to look at these number cubes here, this represents one positive x, another positive x. So this equation would equal 2x, one green, 2 x's, equals negative 6. So what I would want to do is I want to break it down so that I can break each of these into 2 equal groups. I've got 2 here, 2 x's here, I only want 1 x, so how do I break this down into 2 equal groups? You see it? It's going to look like this. These green represent the variable, these represent positive or negative whole numbers, and we'd break it down, and we basically all you gotta do is turn it over to the side. You know, you got 1x there, 1x there, we want to break it down into 1x, and then so 1x equals negative 3, 1x equals negative 3. That's what it looks like. Here, what we would do, if you think about it, we're multiplying by 2. How do you get rid of multiplying by 2? You divide by 2. So what's negative 6 divided by 2? Negative 3, which is what we got there. All right? So before we progress any further, we need to talk about what like terms are. Like terms. They look alike. All right, that's the biggest thing, is numbers or variables that can be combined. All right, that's it. Numbers or variables that can be combined. So when you think about it this way, what are like terms here? You've got x and 3x's. Well, I've got 1x plus 3x's. That gives me 4x. I can combine those. Here are like terms. Y's. Put the y's together. Put the whole numbers together. And that's it. Okay? As long as you're putting the like terms, the like numbers, or the like variables together, you're good to go. And we're going to be dealing with that today. All right, so the opposite operation, again, let's look at this. Remember this. This is just kind of a neat little trick. If you're not familiar with what 1/3 is, it's the same thing as dividing by 3, right? 1/3 is dividing by 3. So if I'm multiplying by negative 1 or by 1/3, how do I get rid of multiplying by 1/3? I divide by 1/3. But it's much easier to look at it like this. How do I get rid of dividing by 3? I multiply by 3. So how do I get rid of a third? Multiply by 3. Or by the reciprocal. If you think of the reciprocal, what's 1/3's reciprocal? 3 over 1. So then you just multiply this by 3, multiply the other side by 3, and bam, you get your answer. Okay? These are the same because if you think about it, keep, flip, change, multiplying or dividing by 3, if you keep the first one, flip the 3, it becomes 1/3, and then you're multiplying that instead of dividing. And that's it. Which one's easier for you? Would you rather divide by 1/3 or multiply by 3? Well, personally, I don't like fractions very much, so I would much rather multiply by 3. I think that's easier. Why don't you look at these two? Let's do it. You're multiplying by negative 1/5. What's the reciprocal of negative 1/5? -5, so you're going to multiply that side by -5. And then reciprocal of 3/7, 7/3, that goes away, turns to 1. Then you multiply this side by 7/3, and then you get your answer. That's what x equals, okay? All right, the reciprocal of any number is just flipping the top and the bottom, flipping the numerator and the denominator, and that's it. Pretty simple. Okay, well, just like we looked at in the past, there is a multiplication and division property of equality. If I divide something by 3 and then I want to get rid of dividing by 3, I multiply by 3, I gotta say, hey, I need to be equal here. I've got to multiply it by 3 on the left side and the right side of the equation, of the equal sign, okay? Got to be fair. So, like this guy, you're dividing by 3. What do? Multiply both sides by 3. Instead of dividing by 3, you multiply by 3. And the trick here is all you got to do is cross multiply. -5 times 3. Bam, that's it. Those ones are super simple when you're dividing. You got to multiply. Now, we're multiplying by 5. So what do? Divide by 5. All you got to do is to get rid of this 5 in front, divide by 5. Take this guy and divide by 5 too. All right, let's look at this one. All right. I want you to do the opposite operation. I want you to write a new equation that looks like this one, except it's got the other operation on it that hasn't. And it hasn't changed anything yet. All right, well, if you're multiplying by 3, how do you get rid of multiplying by 3? Dividing by 3. And that's what your new equation would look like. You'd be putting a division sign underneath that x. What about this guy? You're dividing by 3, so how do you get rid of dividing by 3? Multiply by 3. Just cross multiply there. Bam. Multiplying by 3 to both sides. Clears the 3 away, and that's your answer. All right, so what I want you to do now is look at what is the operation that's being done to the variable and what is the opposite operation that you would use to get rid of it. And then find out what x equals or y equals, okay? Here you're dividing by 2, so how do you get rid of dividing by 2? You multiply by 2 on both sides. That gets rid of this guy. This side's multiplied by 2, and that's your x. How do you get rid of multiplying by -3? Divide by -3. It becomes a fraction of 1/3 over there. And then how do you get rid of 2? You divide by 2. Here are your answers. Are you able to answer your guiding question now of how can we write and solve equations with multiplication and division when we have variables? I bet you are. It wasn't too bad, huh? A lot like the addition and subtraction one. Well, that's it as we talked about solving equations with multiplying and dividing and variables. This was Matt with mathsmath.com. Check us out on Facebook at Solving Maths Problems and on Twitter at mathsmath. And enjoy math and opening presents.